Good morning. I'm Penny Martin, and it is my thrill to welcome you all to the only 100% female-directed strand of the Venice Film Festival. I am, of course, discussing the Miu Miu Women's Tales, which, as you know, surely by now, is a sequence of short films commissioned biannually by the fashion house Miu Miu. There are now 26, can you believe, of these short films by directors such as Agnès Varda, Lynn Ramsey, Lucrezia Martel, and Miranda July, after the latest short, Stana, by Antonetta Alamat Kusjanovic. Premiered here at the Venice Film Festival only yesterday, which means that for 13 years, Miu Miu has been leading from the front in the arena of women-centered filmmaking. Equal opportunities, equal pay, and decent working standards are the sorts of things that we discuss on this panel every year. So, of course, we hope that the current dispute reaches a positive solution for every worker in the industry. While others have been setting quotas and failing to meet them, and we'll come to that later, Mrs. Prada and Miu Miu have been supporting women filmmakers in practical terms to realize their personal visions via the medium of film. But this year, Miu Miu Women's Tales has stepped up and established a committee to help advance that mission even further. And it is a stellar, multi-award-winning panel, council, committee, call it what you may. So it is my great pleasure today to be joined by, in alphabetical order, which is right, the director, producer, and writer, Ava DuVernay. These are all multi-hyphenate women, so let me get this correct. The actor, director, producer, and screenwriter, Maggie Gyllenhaal. And let's see, Catherine, the producer, costume designer, and production designer, Catherine Martin. And together they are going to meet with Miu Miu Women's Tales co-founders, Mrs. Prada and Verdi Visconti. Not only to discuss future projects, but to further amplify the whole culture, the whole community around the Miu Miu Women's Tales project. It is a momentous moment, so I know you've clapped for them all, but please help me welcome and celebrate the Miu Miu Women's Tales. So, friends, it is a hot room we're in, so let me tell you what I'm going to be doing to you like a good doctor. We're going to talk for 40 minutes, and there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions, so if you can sort of store them up till then, we'll make sure we make time. This new phase for Miu Miu Women's Tales is surely an opportunity to start by kind of interrogating the very idea of a woman-centered project and its need. So that's a big question. Let me start with the philosophical Maggie. And this question of whether there really is such a thing as women's filmmaking, women's anything. And I'm starting with you because I know it was something you were asked a lot about in the campaign for your directorial debut, this idea about ambivalent motherhood being a taboo for women creatives, and this idea about actually whether there are specific subjects that are intrinsic to the female condition that need to be expressed in whatever medium, but for you as a filmmaker. Big question, but...
Yeah, I guess in my experience, I do think that women make things differently than men. Not all women, but I find there are some women whose language in writing novels, in making movies, I mean, in all sorts of things that they do, is in a language that speaks to me in a slightly different way to the language of the movies that I've seen most of my life that were mostly made by men. And you know, again, I don't want to be reductive and say, but I guess I think that women have had to learn the language that was offered us, which was primarily a language made by men. And that's great. It's exciting to learn another language. But I think what happened was we created almost like a subterranean language amongst us that wasn't even always verbal, where I was like, I'm hearing something you're laying down. And then to see that articulated in a novel, in a movie, has always been very exciting to me. Like, I remember, for instance, being, I don't know, 16, something like that, like your age. I was just speaking with some young Miu Miu women on the boat here who are the same age as my daughter, and remembering being that age and seeing The Piano, for instance, the Jane Campion movie. And I didn't expect to be kind of bowled over by some of the imagery in that movie, some of the themes in that movie, which were not particularly literal or even like expressed in words, just more in images. Like like the image of Holly Hunter with her ankle tied to the piano at the bottom of the ocean has never left me. And I can't tell you exactly why or what that means or whether it's overtly political or emotional or what, but like it just hit me really hard because I think because it was authored by a woman and it was expressing something that I hadn't seen expressed before.
Yeah, and you also went on to talk about the fact that often a theme that is understandably tackled by women, that of the domestic, had been kind of diminished and considered trivial and lowbrow.
Well, like
whereas
maybe
actually
it wasn't
you made it
high
heroic.
art. Like maybe
Sure.
it's not high art to make movies about the domestic. I believe it is.
Exactly.
But maybe, okay, you know the book Good Morning Midnight? It's a
No.
Jean Rhys book written by a woman in the 30s, I think.
Jean Rhys, the author of Sargasso.
Yeah,
Sea.
Wide Sargasso Sea,
Yeah.
another incredible book, which I just read for the first time. Anyway, I was thinking about that book, Good Morning Midnight, which is about the interior of a woman's mind and the deepest, darkest, strangest, most perverse, most broken down elements of that. So a brave book. But on the surface, this woman is walking around Paris, barely functioning, about to fall off the side of the earth in her mind, getting her hair colored and trying to find a hotel room on no money and buying a dress. And on some level, you're like, well, is that high art? But it is. And I've been, in my life, both consumed by what color my hair is and feeling like I was going to fall off the side of the earth. And it felt very important to me. I mean, of course, you know, how to put this? I guess I just think the way we articulate things is different. And I think it's important to value it, even if it comes out in a different way.
I believe that the woman's perspective is at the heart of Mrs. Prada's brief when she actually commissions a Miu Miu Woman's Tale. And Ava, we have the author of the 5th Woman's Tale, The Door, in You. Yes. I wonder what, are your feelings when given, I mean, to some extent it's an open brief, isn't it? But actually it's quite specific, and it's to consider the essence of femininity itself. Can you tell us a little bit, I mean, I know it's some time ago, but it gives us the opportunity to really realise all the things that have happened in the time since you first were part of the Women's Tales and the extraordinary ascent of your career ever since.
Well, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Verity reminded me that it was 10 years ago that I was here. It was exactly 10 years ago that I was here with The Door, and I remember first having the invitation from Verity to create work. You're going to give me money and Miu Miu clothes, and I can tell a story about women? I mean, I thought it was pretty fantastic. I was an independent filmmaker just getting started. I won't say I was young because I was a new filmmaker, but I wasn't young. And they took a chance on me and was able to make that film and then actually screen here. It was a huge, huge thing. I'd never been to the country. I'd never been to the festival. Really? So just the spectacle of it all, meeting a story that I was holding very closely, is I think one of the beauties of cinema. It is spectacle. Whatever it is, even how small it can be or quiet or intimate the story is, the spectacle is when it meets audience. When what's in your head and what's in your heart actually meets people. They sit in a dark room and they just focus on your ideas it's addictive. It's fantastic. So that's what film was, and the experience of doing it here was quite fantastic. And when I think about the theme of femininity, I mean, that is a whole universe. Sure. So it felt very wide open. I almost didn't even remember that that's what they told me. It just was make a film, because of course it's going to be by women, because I'm about us, because it's coming from me. I really think that even if a woman makes a film with all men in the film, it's still a woman's picture, because it's coming from our mind, our heart, our voice. So I think the idea of what is a woman's film, is not even a question. I like. I mean, it is a question because you asked it, and it's a good one. It's a good one.
It's a start.
But I think, the idea of some women who say, this is not a women's film, this is a film. I respect that. I hear that with black filmmakers. It's not a black film. It's just a film. I don't agree with that. For me, personally, I make black women's pictures. That's what I do. That's who I am. Whatever I'm making is coming through that lens. I'm proud of it. I declare that, and I hope people enjoy that offering. So.
Thank you. Catherine, the other part of the brief, of course, is that they respond to a very specific collection of clothing, and that's the sort of departure point. It's often said in my industry, in fashion, that, the fashion designer, a woman fashion designer has a different experience with clothes because of the emotions she experiences whilst wearing it and the savoir-faire that creates, the way they live their life, etc. Is it as simple as that in film? Is that is that the entry point?
I think that Mucha, as a designer and as a woman, is always examining in her collections the intersection of fashion, femininity, and how women perceive themselves in the world, their sexuality, their relationship to themselves, to men, to the world at large, to their maternal thoughts, to the complexity of being a woman in the 21st century, which involves so many aspects, from work to, discovering who you are as a person and as a creative being in the world. And to me, I'm a costume designer. I see clothes very much as an embodiment of social history, and clothes are important to women because we were the first spinners and the first weavers and responsible for covering our families in some kind of, clothing. So I find that a really interesting idea, that Mucha is wanting, through the women's tales, to explore this idea of women and that political nexus of women and clothes. But these aren't fashion films. So I just watched all 26 of them, and my overall impression was that the clothes, yes, in some instances were very much part of the story, but sometimes they were incidental to a larger story being told. And I think that's what's extraordinary about this initiative, is that each woman has been allowed to tell a story that is intrinsically her own. And another thing that really struck me in all of the stories was just how complicated it is to be a woman. Sometimes I think I just choose not to think about it. I just choose to get on with it. And I just thought, wow, there is such a richness of thought, of dialectical discussion, of the personal and the political that is intermingled in a way that I think, because there are traditional roles that as a woman it's difficult to overcome, that nexus between the domestic and the political is super interesting and very much discussed in these movies, because I think, look, men also have stories, very important stories to tell, and their own angst and their own, very turbulent inner lives. But I think that, yes, what these stories do is that they get to the heart of that complication of, as you said, Maggie, walking down the street and on the one hand you're about to fall off the earth, but you're still considering what hair colour, you should have. So I don't know if that answered the question.
Very
I'm very
well,
good
I
at
think.
rambling.
No, I was just remembering that, is it in the 19th century, often the only private property that many women owned was the inside of their handbag. The space inside their handbag was their only space that they owned. That kind of social history is always...
that what women, and maybe the clothes on their back,
Sure.
That's what you were able to run away with if you were unhappy in your situation.
Ava, you touched... I'm so sorry.
I just want to ask you, I was just thinking when my daughter just read Scarlet Letter, which is written by a man, but very interesting feminist story, but she's a incredible seamstress. I mean, she's like a radical, but the Scarlet Letter that she puts on her clothes is like exquisitely embroidered, and it just made me think of that.
Yeah. Well, imagine that you have to declare your own adultery by your own hand. I mean, that's crazy, right? And and just all that savoir-faire that women have when you see, old samplers from around the world of embroidery and the kind of care and skill and all these traditional skills that women have that are kind of dismissed to some degree, where it's an incredibly important part of our culture as females that I think we need to celebrate. I'm not advocating that everyone should embroider. I'm just saying I don't think we should lose the history.
Ava, you touched on something very interesting and important in the context of this panel, because I realise that it's mainly women that get asked these questions. But we were talking to Antonetta yesterday about this idea about prefixing any creativity with whether it was by a woman or a woman of colour or any community. And she reminded us that it's also very important to be able to compete in the mainstream without feeling that you're funneled into this sort of special group, etc. That it's important to be able to be out in the competition as your film origin is, even though this system can feel kind of rigged at times against us. And here we are at Venice, my 10th panel, I think, of Miu Miu Women's Tales, and still we need to talk briefly about the relatively low number of women that are working behind the camera. Antonetta said, quotas are problematic. Can we briefly have a chat about that and how you feel about them, all of you? Can they be useful, or do we just want the finance, as Antonetta suggested?
What did you say?
She said she'd rather have the money than the quota.
I said that if we get the money to produce the films, then we are competing with the films. And the quotas are important
Sure.
to open the doors, but more than anything is important actually to produce.
Sure.
We need to make them.
Sure. Yeah.
Would anybody like to take that one? Or do we just agree with Antonetta?
I agree with her. I think, I find the quotas are important because they're unfortunate, but they're important because otherwise it's never going to get done. It's just not. If they have a choice and it's wide open, it's not going to happen. If people did not struggle and fight and push for certain rights to be not freely given but wrested from power, I and several women in this room would not be sitting here with other women in this room, period, right? And so everything has to be fought for. There's struggle in all of it. And I think the quotas are, in some ways, wresting power from those who don't want to give it. And so I think of it as, I don't want to be in a quota. No. Abide by this. The challenge is you sign the paper and then you don't do it.
Yeah.
So that's why you need force, the force of women, the force of our voices, not to just accept, okay, there are 5 again this year, and there's 5 next year, and there was 5 the year before, but
Two, a couple of years ago.
This is unacceptable, and then what are we going to do about it? And until enough people say, we've had it, then it doesn't change. And so I think, you know, there are ways to think about the tools that people before us have used for change. And I think in a modern context, in a contemporary context, there are ways of looking at it that make it seem trivial or make it seem like it's a label or a box or special. But we just need to get our films done.
Sure.
And we just, you know, if the quota wasn't in place, I wouldn't be in the festival.
Yeah,
because if they had their choice, you know, we wouldn't be the first choice. And so I think there's a way to reframe it and think about it in terms of how it can help us and how we can use it. And the only way it works is if we continue to apply force.
And it's not just a question of subjectivity, is it? I don't know if you're aware of a study that was done at the London School of Economics, where they because it's so nebulous, isn't it? This idea about quality and subjectivity, etc. Then it starts. You know, that's usually the argument against a quota. But the LSE in 2017 did a study in politics where they had introduced quotas in the 1994 local elections. And in fact, what they found was instead of lowering the quality in order to get more women into politics, what happened is it siphoned off a whole load of mediocre male politicians, and in fact they could categorically say with proof that the quality of the politics had increased. So in fact, if you step away from art where people kind of feel like there's no metric that's kind of substantial, in fact they just work.
You know,
Well,
these
but there-
quotas and go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I just say these quotas and these rules, that study is what it is because when you imagine that no one else has been allowed into the room, the primary folks in the room have had no competition from anyone other than just themselves. The idea that the arbiters of good taste, of power, that hold money, that all of it, influence, are all the same kinds of people who've always been there without competition from anyone else, right? That's why you let some women in, and all of a sudden the mediocre men walk out of the door. You let some people of color in. You let some, you know, folks that have been on the margins who are only on the margins because they are not in the main space. They're not on the stage, not because of any other reason. And once you have everyone competing, excellence rises to the top.
I totally agree that quotas are extremely important because they're a foot in the door, and without forcing people to examine women's work and embrace it and celebrate them, how do you create a culture where young girls can see you, Ava, and you, Maggie, making movies with your own particular voices, and then once you see that, you can aspire to that. And I think I totally agree with you. Unless people don't like giving space to other people, you know, it's a very comfortable place to be in power and to make all the decisions. And once you're forced into an uncomfortable place, amazing discoveries can be made. And I agree with you, the pressure just needs to be kept being putting on to increase the number of female filmmakers in the festival.
At this gloomy moment in the Miu Miu Women's Tales discussion, I usually use 2 examples. The first one is Agnes Varda, who on this stage said that she got so sick of male crews not adhering to her direction or taking any of her instructions, that in 1977 she set up her own production company so that she could actually wrest control of editing and shooting. And then I mention Array, Ava's arts and social impact hiring scheme, which is to promote gender parity and diversity and inclusion in the entertainment industry. I mean, just a brass tacks, pragmatic, kind of measure. Is that the answer? Just forget about the mainstream and start taking matters into your own hands?
Well, I like to do both. So, you know, I believe in having my own liberated territory. Haile Gerima, who's a great Ethiopian filmmaker, always told me, don't just rely on what Hollywood will give you, make sure you have your own space. So Verde has been to our campus in Los Angeles. The president of Array is here, Telaine Jones. And we have built our own small space where if Hollywood kicks us out or hey, we were never really in anyway. We have a space where we can go to make our work, to produce, edit, shoot, do social justice work, all of the things that we think about. And also, I'm driving through the Warner Brothers gate, and I'm talking about quotas, and I'm knocking on the doors, and I'm pitching my stuff, right? So I think it's two trains running to get to a destination that feels very far off, but the things that I do today are standing on the shoulders of the things that Julie Dash did. The things that I do might benefit Demi in her future, and we all continue to just create this ladder.
Because, it would be remiss of me not to mention, if we think the stats are bad in general for women, I think it's 24% in the last year, 250 gross top US films. The University of Southern California does a study that states that only 2.7 of all directors in 2022 were women of color. I mean, can that be possibly true?
Yes.
In the sample in the last 16 years, I think there's 21 jobs, and they were spread across 5 women directors, of which you're one. It does bear repeating.
It does, because it's really violent. It's hard for you to be able to see, how can I even pierce through that? And that's why every tool at our disposal, whether it's quotas, whether it's knocking on doors, whether it's building your own, you have to kind of do it all at the same time.
Yeah, because there isn't a metric for what the best film is. And so who are the arbiters of who's choosing that? And I think when you say you must fill this many slots and then still they're not filled, it shifts what is considered excellent and what's considered worthwhile and what's considered valuable.
What if no actresses came to the festival next year unless the quota was met? Or what if our male counterparts stood with us and said, "Wow, no, we need to give half these slots. You need to not even find these
supposed to be
films, consider them."
half? Is it supposed to be half? Is that what the
Parity.
2018, yeah.
And instead it's 5?
Yeah, of 23. And a couple of years ago, it was 2.
So and we know the films are there. So it's a question, and the real question is, what will we do? We don't like it, so what do we do about it beyond talk about it?
Well, that's a great question, isn't it? If the answer is to stop looking for the establishment to solve our problems and to take matters into our own hands, paint me a picture of what the Miu Miu Women's Tales Committee is going to do. What could it look like? Like 5 years from hence, what could we be doing? July, yeah.
No, we had our first meeting yesterday.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. Yes.
Tell us more.
It was very exciting. And the real thing was that there was energy brewing. There were ideas, bold ideas that are really just steeped in growth and a blossoming of this idea. There have been 26 films so far, and the question is, what are the next 26 going to look like, going to feel like? And really, Mrs. Prada has a vision that's evolving, and how can we help ask and answer the questions that get her vision to the next place? And so having been a part of it as a filmmaker, even from 5 to 26, there's been a huge shift in the focus and the things that folks are interested in. My film was very much a fashion film. I mean, I really like it, but it's completely different from your film. And what will the next 10 from yours be like? So that's the exciting thing. How do we support these women, but also how do we really celebrate what's already been done? I mean, 26 films is an extraordinary accomplishment. Yeah. So that's a lot of what we're focusing on.
And are there genres that are untapped? I was trying to think, we are always having chats about whether we could have horror or science fiction, or haven't you sat and watched all 26, you champion? What do you think we could get, what extra corners could we introduce?
Well, I think it's just about actively searching out for new voices, both established and new, and allowing women to reveal the stories that they want to tell. And I think one of the things we were talking about yesterday is really committing to being sure that these 26 movies were seen by audiences, and that people had access to the movies, and that they understood kind of the context in which they were shot, and that there was a celebration of this initiative. Because I think that if you're a young girl and you know that women's tales is a possibility, You know, as soon as opportunity and a quota, and you get to see, you can imagine in your mind that you have the possibility of achieving this, and you can look to the future. So I think it's a really, you know, there are lighthouse moments where, you know, Ava, what you do is so important because you are a lighthouse moment. Young women of colour look at you and go, I could do that too, you know? And the fact that you work both within and without the system is really important because women, we are trapped in a system, you know? I have a child who's a communist and they are extremely critical of me. Yeah, like I'm a bourgeois nightmare. And, you know, I'm refusing the revolution and I go, well, you know, I'm system bound, I'm 58. But I think that idea, so what's interesting is Miu Miu Women's Tales kind of does the same thing. It's working within a system, which is the fashion world, but at the same time, it's revolutionary because it's allowing women to have a kind of relatively unfettered voice. And if we can get it out in front of more young women and girls, and they can see that there are these opportunities, you know, in the future, you're ensuring a new generation. Because I get really depressed when I'm at work, and I work in a very female-centric environment, especially in costumes, and I just see that we're getting older and older. And how do we make what we do interesting or attractive to a younger generation? Or how do they even know what we do? Do you know what I mean?
Can I say something about this? In general, I've been really interested in, this is like a catchphrase, and I think it's used in a way that doesn't mean anything often, you know, women supporting other women. But I'm really actually curious about this because if the real estate is this big for us and it's this big for everybody, you know, for all the men, for everybody else, which is what we were just talking about, we have been sold this like bill of goods that we're supposed to compete with each other. We're supposed to act like we're not, and we're supposed to shove each other off of the tiny bit of real estate that we've been offered. And that is the death of us, truly. And I found, we were talking about this the other night, we must see each other's films. We must watch them start to finish, whether we like them or not, whether it's my taste or not. We must watch them. We must watch them with curiosity, empathy, compassion, because we have been taught in, you know, our age to compete and to have envy and to have jealousy, and that is like so broken. And so something that we're doing also, I think, one of the things that we're being asked to do is to figure out who are the women that we can lift up, who are the women that we can support and that we can give that kind of energy to. And I want to say about what you were saying about, you know, the younger generation. I was looking at Emma Corrin, gorgeous.
Who wasn't?
Yeah, totally. In her underwear, and the way she stood in front of the camera, I just looking at her and thinking, I was taught that I had to be as appealing as I could possibly be. I had to offer the most, appealing version of myself, as opposed to just myself. And I watched her, much younger than me, not doing that, or not doing it as much. I mean, it's hard with all the cameras, I mean, Jesus, but much less than I did do. And I think that is a real movement, you know, and that's not movies, that's just being a woman in the world, which is another thing that Mrs. Prada was saying she wants to talk about. What are we allowed in terms of vanity? Are we allowed to walk around thinking about our films and what color our hair is? You know, what are we allowed?
And that was the theme of the film yesterday, wasn't it? About not being not necessarily being the compliant good girl. That kind of feeling that you were raised indeed to be appealing and not say no. And beyond the films, maybe I'm projecting some of my own ambition onto the project. Maybe is that allowed? But what other forms could it take? You know, we're really underserved by a critical forum. There's not that many good film magazines that really support women's films. So could there be a publication? Could there be a film school? Could there be a prize? What other forms could it erupt
It would
into?
definitely be cool if there was some interesting film criticism. We were also
Yes.
talking, who was I talking about that with yesterday? Oh, Mrs. Prada. We were talking about analysis and criticism and journalism, and it would be so interesting if that were a part of this. That's your idea, and we'll take it, thank you.
But it's in the stats, you know, along with all how many women's films are made or greenlit or how many cinematographers are behind the camera. Often it's about what kind of, whether the top brass publications are really devoting their best reviewers to going out and supporting and talking about those films. It's crucial, you know, and there's a whole industry around it. So, yeah, well, that sounds very exciting. I read last year, I think, that you were writing something and you have projects ongoing. How much can you tell us about what comes next?
I'm not ready to say much, but
Your brother seems to want to talk about it.
does he? I didn't know that. My brother has read it, and he's an amazing sort of artistic partner in the world, along with my husband who's here, and you know, a handful of other people. Anyway, I'm very excited about my new film. I'm also entering into really new, wild, kind of radical territory, which always comes
Really?
with some terror, which is exciting too. Yeah, I'm just really getting down to rolling my sleeves up and getting to work as a director, and so.
Can you give it a name? Do we know what the project's titled? What we'll see from you next?
I really better not, but really soon we'll be able to make an announcement, and I'm very excited about it.
Thank you. I mean, so many years of your life must have felt like they were about Elvis. When do you start to work on something next, or do you work with kind of parallel projects? Tell us what you're doing and what you're going to do.
We're sort of working on what the next 10 years will kind of look like and what the slate will be. But it sort of feels like I'm bobbing around in the ocean, kind of hanging on to a bit of driftwood and seeing a kind of a parade of ideas go in front of me. And trying not to become too attached to any one thing. Because as soon as I become attached, you know, that's not the project we're going to do. So then you have to mourn that. So we're in a kind of a wait and see moment. But because I work with my husband and we have basically a family business, a company, there's always stuff to do. And, you know, whether it's, you know, picking the colour for my the kitchenette in the office, for the cabinet doors, you know, I do occupy my time. I'm always busy. I like to do a lot of things. But yeah, we don't have any, there's no, I don't have any, there's no formal or breaking news just this moment. I'm working on a personal project that we'll probably announce at the beginning of next year. That'll be a documentary.
You made a documentary about your mum, didn't you?
No, that was my
Oh,
nephew,
nephew, okay.
Who is a product of, I think, quotas, because he's queer and he's also deaf, and he's a documentarian, and he's been making excellent films because he got opportunities because there were extra opportunities for him, you know, and we wouldn't have his voice if it wasn't for that. And he lifts up other deaf filmmakers and artists and runs a lot of education, helping them to produce their work and their vision of the world. So I'm very dedicated to anything that allows more inclusion. I think you see it in the work that Baz and I do, is a lot about kind of telling stories that are personal but international, and also trying to have a dialogue about, more people inside the tent than outside the tent. And I think that as women, we absolutely need to commit to being more supportive to other women, actively hiring more women, actively encouraging women within our circle to be generous with their skills. And, I know Mandy Walker that we work with, who's a female DP. We always try and bring women into the camera department whenever we work. And it's a struggle because it's not something that women do in general, and there are so few of them. But you need to actively search these people out and encourage them to become part of that working group.
To that,
I was thinking Antoinetta and I had the same DP on our features.
Helen Louvrat.
Helen Louvrat on Marina and on The Lost Daughter. And in some ways that's a coincidence, or it's something to do with our brilliant taste.
Might be because she's very good.
But also because I think my film and maybe your film also, I think, did particularly speak to some women HODs and creatives, and there aren't very many, So in some ways it's to do with taste, and in other ways it's to do with there just not being enough women behind the camera.
Yeah, and you have to allow an apprenticeship program. You have to invest in the education of people to lift them up, because you can't expect, to have Mozart if he never learnt how to play the violin, So there needs to be, and it feels artificial and it feels mannered to be going, no, we must encourage, we must have a certain number of people of colour working in the art department, or, we've got to fight for costume designers to get paid the same as production designers. And I am ashamed to say, when I do both jobs, I always get paid less for being a costume designer.
But that's
and
the
it's
thing
only,
about the domestic being less valuable.
And it's only this year, when it was Naked Without Us, that I suddenly went, hang on a minute, I'm a producer. I should be actively making sure that this doesn't... How did I think this was okay? Right. This is not okay. And so I think you need to, have a voice. And I am inspired by this to go back and encourage some of my wonderful but less generous colleagues, and that's not Mandy, they're people in my wardrobe department, who have so many skills, but they fought so hard to be in that position.
Well, at that moment, why don't we finish by you telling me which woman filmmaker you think should direct the next Miu Miu Women's Tale?
Oh, we have that is such a big... But the one thing, it's such a big question,
below
I
the
think.
committee. Then why don't you tell me what you look forward to seeing at Venice?
Well, I am actually leaving tomorrow, so I won't see any movies, but I certainly want to see Ava's film.
That's the right answer.
Thank you. I'd love to see Sophia's film, because, Baz and I feel really committed to... a story is a story, and there are so many different perspectives to one story. So if you have a Shakespeare, you can tell Romeo and Juliet one way, and you can tell it completely differently. And for us, we love the idea that there is a subject matter that we're all sharing in, and everyone is examining it from a different perspective. So we're really excited to see that movie. And there are so many others as well. I have a list, but I am terrible with names.
I think you gave us one, and we're delighted to hear it. Am I? Do you have one? Would you like to add?
Well, I'm going to see Ava's film. I'm going to see Sophia's film tonight, and then also my husband has a film in competition, so we'll just give a little plug.
Let's give its title a shout.
It's called Memory, Michelle Franco's film with Jessica Chastain and Peter, so we'll be here for that one too.
Fantastic. Well, I realised that we should have booked 2 hours for this conversation, but I don't want to rob you of a chance to ask a question if you have one. We've covered a lot of ground, but are there any questions for our panel? Has someone got a roving microphone, or should I bring...
I can raise my voice.
Please, tell us who you are. You're very welcome.
It's a question for Maggie. As you come from a you're surrounded by talents, and I thought that you considered natural passing from role to role, actress, producer, screenwriter. I wonder if you make a comparison of the difficulties that you had in moving from role to the other, and the people that were surrounding you. And also, if you can look in retrospect at what you've done, if you can apply a female gaze to some of the stuff you've done, like Secretary, for instance, it would be fun working with your fantasy.
Well, like Ava was saying, I'm a woman, and so there is a female gaze applied to everything I look at, and certainly everything that I've made. If you're not directing something, of course, there are times when things are articulated that aren't what you meant, but I'm always trying to be as honest as possible about my feminine experience in the world and put that into the work that I do. I can't totally remember the other thing you asked me. Moving from being an actress to being a director, I think that's a very big question. In some ways, I think it came very, very naturally because as I say, I've always considered myself a storyteller. I never considered myself a chess piece for a director to move around, and I don't think any good director thinks of their actors that way. But I always thought that my job as an actress was in some ways directorial, to care for and support the story of the subjective piece of the story that I was telling. And the thing I really learned as an actress that I think served me massively as a director is I know what it feels like as an actor to work on a set where you're loved, and you can't fake that, and respected and seen by your director, and I know what it feels like when you aren't. And I hired only people that I had a deep curiosity about and respect for, and then I fell in love with all of them. And I made space for them to express themselves. And that, I think, is a really big part of the reason why my film worked, because it holds the perspectives and the minds and the beating hearts of many, many, many interesting people.
Good answer. Do we have another question? One at the back there. Do you want?
Maggie, you said the importance of women supporting women, and so I'm curious if each of you could share a woman who's been a particular support for one of you in your career or personal life.
Excellent question. A kind of a mentor, whether real or even imagined. Whose advice have you benefited from, or kind of example? A woman working in the industry.
I think there's so many women who've helped me on my journey, but I rarely talk about a woman who is kind of on the journey with me, who allows me to be able to do what I do. She's the president of my company, Tulane Jones. She's here. So often when we think about mentorship, it could be, or guidance, it's something that's far off, or it's someone who, is wise and has done it all before. But I think there's something also about in the trenches, side by side, saying, yes, you can do it, or no, don't do that. You know what I mean? Right there, shoulder to shoulder, that I look at my trajectory and know that there's no way I could have kind of gotten the freedom around some of my work if I did not have someone there who was supporting what was happening back at the office, making sure that the ground was laid and was smooth for me to walk forward. So it's my opportunity to say thank you to Tulane Jones.
Some of you may have seen a conversation that Ava and I and Isabel Sandoval did at the time of Isabel's Miu Miu Women's Tales Shangri-La, where also Isabel was talking about a kind of informal mentorship that she received from you, and the kind of conversations, and kind of to be able to realize that transition from thinking of herself as a kind of creative to actually authorship. So it obviously operates both ways.
Absolutely. Tulane actually distributed her film. If no one's seen Isabel Sandoval's film, she's one of the, what's the name of her film?
Shangri-La.
So good.
I think my mother is intrinsic in making me who I am in a weird way, because she was extremely, or she's still alive, extremely demanding and quite critical. But the thing that she did was she always imagined that I could succeed or whatever I put my mind to, and it was no excuse to be a woman, which is probably politically incorrect to say, but that was kind of her worldview, coming as a French woman born, just as the Second World War was starting. So her view was, you can do what you put your mind to, and there are kind of take no prisoners. And then very much women who are in the trenches with me, whether it's Mandy Walker and that sharing of the artistic journey and working together as colleagues and friends, and also in a more intimate and domestic situation, like my wardrobe supervisor, Kerry Thompson, who it's a very intimate, kind of more domestic, still artistic, but relationship where you have someone who tells you that is a really bad idea or are you smoking crack today, because that's just bad. And you need those people in your life who also create boundaries for you in terms of what is good, what is bad, and that you allow yourself to be vulnerable to, because I think that's one great thing about women in general. I've found my colleagues take criticism pretty well, and criticism and how can I put it, constructive criticism of work or a debrief allows you to move forward and do better work. And I think when you can be vulnerable in that situation, you do your best.
Trust, a sparring partner.
Yeah.
And we should make sure that you have a
I'm just listening to you guys and thinking, now and then I have come across women who didn't support me, but mostly I was like, I'm thinking of so many women that have been emotionally, intellectually, spiritually supportive of me. I'll just quickly, I had a teacher who was my acting teacher for many years, who passed away at almost 80, who was a dear, dear friend, but who taught me, I think the thing she really taught me was the power and the beauty of the reality of the feminine experience as opposed to the fantasy, which is often what we're served. And I started to try to serve my sense of the reality of it, and I felt like people were like, yes, we can accept that. And that was a major gift to me. And I would just also say, I have 3 producers in my life, 2 who I did The Lost Daughter with, who I also did this film, The Kindergarten Teacher with, who said to me when we were doing The Kindergarten Teacher, you need to direct. And not just you need to direct, but you need to direct now. And I was really scared, and they just kept pushing me, even in my imperfection, even in my fear, and then now this new producer who's joined our group, another powerhouse of a woman who has much more experience than any of us, who's kind of rounded out our team, and I feel so massively supported by these women to do this new thing I'm going to take on.
Great question, generated plenty for us to all think about, but I'm aware that we have now well run out of time. If that's our last question, I want to make sure that you all know where to see all these films, and maybe you have some suggestions of your own, and that is at miumiu.com by all 26 directors, including, obviously, Antonetta Alamat-Kasjanovic, Chloe Sevigny, Crystal Moselle, who went on to develop her Miu Miu Women's Tale into a series, Zoe Cassavetes, Hayley Gates, more to be said there, but I daren't fill in the gaps there. But before you do see all those films, of course, it remains for us to thank the newly formed Miu Miu Women's Tales Committee, Ava DuVernay, and her Maggie Gyllenhaal, and Catherine Martin.